All right, welcome to Cinema Pod. I am your host, Benjamin Weingard, assistant professor at Hillsdale College, returning after a week off with the ever hidden co-host.
The ever diminishing co-host.
Yeah,
The
relegated
line
to
guard.
not just co-host on this podcast, but I've now taken over your other
Right.
podcasts. It just
I've
has to be
a
humiliating.
lot of loss of status over the past few months.
So today we're going to talk about the film Gone Baby Gone. I think we'll get into the weeds a bit on especially the core dilemma of the film.
Yes,
Um,
the moral dilemma is one of the more maybe what elevates it from sort of like B noir to high art.
Agreed. So Gone Baby Gone, directed by Ben Affleck. It was the first film that he directed, and it was released in 2007. Affleck went on to direct The Town, Argo. Both Argo and The Town received positive reviews, as did Gone Baby Gone. And then in 2016, he directed Live by Night, which is similar to Gone Baby Gone in that it's a neo-noir type film, but it did not receive positive reviews.
Yes. And we should note this was like part of the I guess you could call it the Affleck Renaissance because because he got big with Goodwill Hunting, obviously, and then he went really big and was in like a bunch of blockbusters, Armageddon, for example. And then he was kind of dismissed as this, sort of lightweight actor who was just playing the fame game, whereas Matt Damon was seen as the serious actor who was picking good roles.
Yes.
And and then Affleck came out with this, and people were like, "Whoa, this guy's actually got talent, right?" Because this is, of course, a well-directed, well-made film, as we'll get into, and then his other films. I think The Town. I haven't seen his last one, but I have seen The Town and I have seen Argo. I think Argo is good but overrated. I think The Town is his best directed film. It's where like you can see he's upped his game since Gone Baby Gone, but it's not quite as interesting as Gone Baby Gone. Just the material's not.
So would we say after the somewhat tepid showing as Batman in the negatively received Live by Night that the Renaissance has ended?
It possibly has, but I've heard that he's working on a script with Damon again.
Oh,
Perhaps.
they're filming.
Oh yeah, okay, they're
Yeah,
filming
that the
now.
last duel or kind of
Yeah,
this
that's right.
medieval movie.
That's right. So perhaps, and also
He did have a
Affleck,
comeback acting performance,
right, in
right?
The Way Back, which is actually his best acting performance.
Yes,
So
agreed.
he's a talented guy, obviously,
Yes.
sort of troubled and compelling, and does a lot of stuff that is mediocre at best. But when he puts his mind to something, he is incredibly talented.
Yes, he's a very intelligent person, but he has some clear personality flaws that are not as evident in Matt Damon, who he is for
Yes,
obvious reasons compared with.
yes.
So
This is
Gone Baby.
also taken from a Dennis Lehane novel.
Yeah, so I was going to note that. So
Okay.
the film script is co-written by Ben Affleck and Aaron Stockard. It's based on Gone Baby Gone, the Dennis Lehane book. Lehane also wrote Mystic River.
Right, which of
It
course turned into a Clint Eastwood directed, widely praised, in my view, overrated
overrated.
film.
Yeah. So Gone Baby Gone stars Amy Ryan, Morgan Freeman, Ed Harris, Casey Affleck, and Michelle Monaghan.
Yeah, and we should say I've read part of Gone Baby Gone. I was never interested in reading the whole book. I just wanted to see where it differed from the movie, etc. And I found the book, rather the prose, somewhat pedestrian, and it was much more bloated, The intro, for example, the intro is completely different.
Mhm.
And I like the intro to Gone Baby Gone, which introduces which you know, it begins immediately with some of the interesting, maybe less apparent. I mean, they're obvious themes, but they're less discussed because the moral dilemma is the one that is the most sort of alarming at the end and that sticks with you. So I think the script is better than the book, and the film is better than the book from what I can tell. And if you're gonna make a film, as they say, take a mediocre novel, right? You don't
Right.
want to film Anna Karenina or Crime and Punishment. You want to do something that's kind of mediocre that you can tighten and improve upon, which seems to be what Affleck and his co-writer did here.
So as we noted, this is considered a neo-noir film. So I'll just kind of give some background on that. Why neo-noir, which just means new noir. So film noir generally is considered to be these kind of stylish Hollywood crime dramas, emphasizing cynical attitudes, sexual motivations, crime, cinematically they have kind of this German expressionist look to them. Kind of, what would we say, like emphasizing low-key lighting, shadow, use of shadows,
Darkness, chiaroscuro, if you
yeah,
will. So
unbalanced compositions, right?
yeah,
Unusual camera placement, this kind of disorienting visual
creating a
style.
disconcerting visual style. Yeah, and I don't really think those features aren't really apparent in Gone Baby Gone.
Right. So I think what's important is the classical film noir period runs from the 40s through the 50s, and then some people would say the classical noir kind of ends with right around the Touch of Evil, somewhere around there. So some of the classical film noir, The Maltese Falcon, 1941 by John Huston, Double Indemnity might be the most prototypical of all of the film noirs, directed by Billy Wilder in 1944. Many others, Out of the Past, The Big Sleep, and so on. The neo-noir is interesting because it's just new noir, but most neo-noir films toss aside the visuals of the classical noir while still focusing on some of the underlying themes and the kind of sensibility of, like a dark underworld, a flawed protagonist, cynicism.
Well, I mean, one of the important things, obviously, is that you move from black and white filmmaking to colored filmmaking when you get into the neo-noir era, which
Right.
changes the way you shoot things. And so you do still have David Fincher, for example. If you look at Seven, which you might call a neo-noir, or The Game, or even Zodiac, they are very dark, shadowy looking films. But there's also something with the neo-noir, you get what you might call the gritty genre of the neo-noir, where you go for, instead of for this more artistic and exaggerated world of shadows, you go for this, like, quote unquote realism of grittiness, where you're just showing unvarnished reality. Clearly that's the Gone Baby Gone. That was what influenced Ben Affleck's vision here, is this attempt to depict reality in all of its unvarnished glory.
Yeah. And two of the more famous neo-noirs are Chinatown, 1974 by Roman Polanski, and The Long Goodbye, 1973, Robert Altman.
Yes.
And The Long Goodbye has a kind of humorous,
that's a kind of
approach.
almost postmodern. It's a postmodern type, whereas Gone Baby Gone is definitely not. It's a very a serious film.
Yeah, so Gone Baby Gone is not I mean, it's a film on itself. It's not a commentary on other films or a
Right.
genre of film. It just happens to explore a lot of themes that are considered noir-like.
Right. Although there is this kind of fast trash talking aspect to Patrick Kenzie, who's the detective here,
Mhm.
that is clearly influenced by the Humphrey Bogart type detective, and that we can talk about, but you could argue is a bit out of place in the film. So it's interesting that they do that, and there are two scenes in particular where Kenzie shoots off at the mouth
Yes.
that are, I think you could almost see them. The way I like to read it is as a homage to the film noirs, because then you can argue, it makes sense of why it's in the film, because it definitely departs from realism in those two scenes.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely an homage to like Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe.
Right.
Right. And it is a bit out of place. And you can, in these scenes, he speaks in fully formed paragraphs filled with witticism.
Yeah, very eloquent, but full of curses, but still very eloquent at the same time.
Yeah, so the filming took place in South Boston, and that's important because it through and through it's a Boston film.
Yeah.
Specifically, it takes place in Dorchester, a neighborhood, a relatively poor working class neighborhood near Boston, and Affleck thought it was important to make the film feel genuine and real, so he used a lot of extras who are actually just people walking around in the neighborhood, and other actors and actresses were not well known, but they were individuals who actually grew up in the Boston area.
Yeah, and I
So
I think the area, this area of Boston is really one of the characters of the film, and in fact, the film begins with a montage
yeah,
of it. So I mean, it kind of illustrates right away that this is one of the important parts about the film, is understanding how life works in one of these poorer, or maybe lower, sort of lower middle class working neighborhoods.
yes. So just lastly, before we get into the film itself, I'll note that it currently holds a 94% at Rotten Tomatoes, 7.6 at IMDb, and 72 out of 100 at Metacritic. And as I noted, it received mostly laudatory reviews. It appeared on 65 critics' top 10 lists
Mhm.
of best film of 2007, which I looked back at this yesterday and just realized that 2007 was a pretty spectacular year for
Yeah, what
film.
did it have? Like No Country, There Will
Yeah,
Be Blood.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
No Country, There Will Be Blood, Gone Baby Gone are the three that stuck out for me. I think Atonement, a
Oh
few
yeah. Yep.
other films that are definitely a year that holds up. Like if somebody asked me what films were released in 2008, I can't name
Yeah. So
many.
legitimate masterpieces, or at least like compelling films that are still interesting in the sort of zeitgeist.
So, as we noted, it opens with this montage of the Dorchester neighborhood where Patrick Kenzie, played by Casey Affleck, is narrating. And he opens with I always believed it was the things you don't choose that makes you who you are, your city, your neighborhood, your family. People here take pride in these things like it was something that they had accomplished.
And importantly, or interestingly, a very conservative message to begin the film, right?
Yeah, there
um,
is no free will in
right,
this world
taking
here.
and also the idea that you take pride in things that you didn't have any control over, right? But also the way that this is shot, it lingers on what you might say are degenerate looking characters. It really sets the atmosphere, or sets the idea that this is a rough neighborhood with rough people that some of them you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley at, at night, right?
Yes,
Uh,
and
lots of tattoos and obesity as well.
yeah, and Kenzie notes the city can be hard.
Yes, he does.
And then he ends this opening narration with the, when I was young, I asked my priest how you could get to heaven and still protect yourself from all of the evil in the world. He told me what God said to his children. You are sheep among wolves, be wise as serpents, yet innocent as doves.
Yes.
And that kicks into the intro where we find out that Amanda McCready, who is a 4-year-old girl, is missing, right? Yes. And Amanda McCready's mother is Helene, who's
played by Amy Ryan.
Yeah, terrific performance by Amy Ryan. And as we'll see, she is a very troubled individual.
Yes.
And in this opening, we have Patrick Kenzie is talking to his girlfriend, Angie Gennaro, played by Michelle Monaghan. And I think the Moynihan performance is the weakest performance of the major actors.
I'm gonna make a bold claim that I'm gonna defend later, that actually Morgan Freeman's is the weakest performance.
Okay.
And that Moynihan's is the second weakest. And that, but they're yes, I think Moynihan is in Freeman's case, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was Affleck made a bad decisions or what. But in Moynihan's case, I just think it's Moynihan's a mediocre actress.
Yeah, she's a mediocre actress, and I would say the
script doesn't help her out.
Yeah, it's not a strong role, even though she is, you know,
and this is different from the novel, because in the novel they solve, I think there are 4 of them, and they're much more equal in the novel, if you will, and they solve cases together. Here, she ends up just kind of playing the foil.
Yes.
Right. And depicting a different utilitarian. She's sort of the utilitarian worldview, right?
She's the utilitarian worldview, but she's also an outsider in terms of this kind of lower class, seedy neighborhood. She doesn't fit in. We find out she's like this woman who was popular in high school, seems to, I mean, she's with Patrick, but she seems to be someone who came from like a middle class type background.
Well, so this is what I think is interesting about the film upon this watching, is that there's really a class dynamic running through it.
Right.
And we don't really know much about Patrick's background, but we get the sense that he is pretty rough. I mean, he claims that he quit snorting cocaine.
Yeah, we know he snorted coke, and he hung out with a lot of unsavory characters.
Right, and also he seems to have more sympathy for them and to be less judgmental. There's especially the car scene, which we'll talk about, where you see this, and like obviously Ben Affleck, the director, makes quite a point of this, that Angie, her view of Helene is much more bleak and judgmental than is Patrick's.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this sympathetic view that Casey Affleck's character Patrick has of the like lower class or working class Boston, because that's a similar view that Ben Affleck and Matt Damon wrote in Good Will Hunting, right? Where there's a very sympathetic portrayal of the Boston working class.
Right, but I would say importantly, it's not clear that it's not sympathetic here. Like Ben Affleck wisely goes out of his way to make it morally ambiguous and difficult to grapple with, right? I mean, it's not that you watch this and think, oh yeah, this is like a very sympathetic portrait of this neighborhood. It's rough, and he goes out of his way to put in your face their bad behaviors.
Yeah, I think it's sympathetic, but not romanticized. It's sympathetic in that we're trying to do a three-dimensional portrayal of these people's lives,
Sure.
and not be judgmental in how
Sure.
they're portrayed.
So sure. So I mean, really, the action kicks off when B and Lionel McCready, who Lionel McCready is Helene McCready's brother.
Hmm.
Helene McCready is the one with the missing daughter. So Amanda's missing. Lionel and B come over to Patrick and Angie's apartment, and they're trying to get them. And Patrick and Angie are private investigators who specialize in missing persons. So they're trying to get them to work on the case.
Hmm.
And it's clear that Angie doesn't want to do it because she's worried about finding a dead or abused child and that she won't be able to handle it. Patrick seems to want to do it, probably because he needs the money, is the sense you get. He wants to take this and get the money. So
Yeah.
then they go over to
Helene's apartment.
where Helene is sitting with Dottie.
Yes.
Who plays Dottie?
Jill Quigley or something.
Because she also knocks her role out of the park. So you have Dottie and Helene sitting on the couch, right?
Yes.
And they're sort of acting as though everybody's trying to get their piece of them, and that now they're getting attention, and they're yelling at each other, telling people to fuck off, and clearly.
And when the interesting, I like the comment when Patrick and Angie walk in, Dottie says to Angie, "I remember you from high school. I see you're still a little conceited, huh?"
Right.
Like,
so yes.
Get your fucking attractive, snooty bullshit out of here.
Right. No, Patrick seems to be able to do a better job immediately of talking to them, but then they have some fights in there, and then Angie's like, "Let's leave." And so she clearly doesn't want to do it. They step aside, and B and Lionel intervene, and B shows the picture of Amanda, which eventually pushes Angie to agree to do this.
Before that, though, we learn that Helene drinks at the Fillmore, this bar, every day.
Yes.
This is according to Lionel, and that she does drugs, coke, at least a couple of times a week. And they also, Angie and Patrick, go and look at Amanda's room, which is bereft of furniture and really disheveled, and the walls are somewhat dilapidated. It just does not look like there's a lot of love in this room.
The kitchen is also, the sink is just full of dirty dishes.
Yes.
and quite disgusting. Lionel also says that they have the alcoholic gene. He himself put the plug in the jug for 23 years, I think.
Yeah.
So it's a rough family. It's pretty clear that Helene's not going to win any awards for best mother of the year, and we get the sense that she's probably even doing more drugs than we hear about here. They agree to do this. So you again, this is where I think just the Angie character is just kind of disappointing, because she's here basically to be the foil that we root against, because we want them to take the case, of course, because we want the movie to happen. And she finally agrees to it, and we're like, oh yay. So it's a little bit of false suspense, or whatever you would say. I don't find it particularly compelling.
But one thing that Angie's character does throughout the film that I think is interesting is she is clearly uncomfortable around these types of people throughout the entire film. And we see that Patrick is much more at ease and comfortable and can relate to them.
Yeah, that's true.
So while they're in Amanda McCready's room, the captain of is it missing persons or missing children
Yeah,
kind of
whatever the unit he started, he's
yeah,
the
that
head
he,
of and started.
yeah, because
Jack
this
Doyle.
Jack Doyle, played by Morgan Freeman, and he lost his child was taken from him and killed when she was very young, right? So we
Yes.
learned this, and that's why he started this unit. So
Well, so
he,
yeah,
yeah,
here you get the first of like Patrick Kenzie's
that's right.
cockiness, right?
Yeah, so
um,
Doyle comes in is immediately dismissive of Patrick. Right? He's like, why are you guys on this? You know, you're just gonna fuck things up. Basically, let the professionals handle this, right?
yep.
And
And also he's the one who gives the novel starts out with these statistics about missing people. In the movie, he's the one who tells us the information about basically if you don't solve the case within 24 hours, like 90% of the cases are never solved, etc. So
yeah,
he lets us know how dire the situation is.
yes, and this is where we first have this kind of bravado from Patrick, because Patrick says, you know, essentially, look, I've been hired by a woman who's the victim of a crime, and I'm entitled as her representative to be cooperated with by the police department. So I
Right.
expect to be.
Right.
And then Doyle just kind of has a smirk on. He's like, "What? All right, and you will be right.
Yeah,
Fine."
whatever. But then he does this like I don't care how it gets done. I just want it to get done. Now, this is where so part of my problem with this Freeman performance is that it's just so kind of it's almost like a caricature of his avuncular
Mhm.
persona and it just doesn't feel real throughout. That's kind of my problem with it. And even here it just kind of feels a bit, I don't want to call it wooden. I just think it's like the wrong decision for this character. And I would have preferred the character to be a little bit more emotionally raw, because that's almost how it seems as though it should be with the script, because he acts very angry here, but you don't get the sense, you get the sense that this is a totally controlled character, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I don't like, and I think if you compare this performance to Remy Brissot, played by Ed Harris, that's a much more interesting performance, an emotionally volatile one, right? So
Yeah, it's a more interesting performance. I agree with that. I think one thing that Freeman's doing with the Doyle character is he's at pains to portray this guy who's not doing this out of ego, right?
yes,
Like that's
yeah,
one message that Doyle will see, like repeatedly tries to
right,
convey this. This is just about getting the job done. That's all I care about. It's
yes.
not about me. It's not about you in particular.
Right. But
Yeah.
he could do that without the performance he chose, just with the dialogue, right? I mean, the dialogue's there and they it's something that runs throughout his conversation. So anyway, I mean, some people might defend his performance. That's fine. I just found it a little bit uh underwhelming, I will say. But whatever the case is, they then go to the bar,
Yeah, they
right?
go to the Fillmores
The
where they
Fillmore.
discovered that Helene spends a lot of her nights.
Right. And they Patrick finds this or he sees like one of his ex-friends or still friends, I guess you would say. And they start talking about Helene, and the friend starts telling him that Helene was at the Fillmore doing a lot of bumps of cocaine the time the night her daughter went missing.
Yeah.
And they that's where they first learn of Ray Lakansky, right?
Yeah,
The
Skinny Ray.
Skinny Ray, who was doing rails with her. And then this
Yes.
other guy at the bar who sort of looks like a like the ugly brother of Kiefer Sutherland.
I was going to say he looked like a roided up Kiefer
Yes.
Sutherland.
He starts looking at this guy and he's getting angry that this guy is giving information to Angie and Patrick. It's not clear why he's angry about this, and actually neither of these characters show up again. The bartender,
Big Dave, the
Big Dave,
bartender,
yeah,
or this Lenny is the Sutherland
right,
looking guy.
right. So they talk. He starts talking shit to Patrick. Patrick starts talking shit back.
And
Right.
then one thing we see is that when Patrick takes particular umbrage when people disrespect Angie.
Yes. Yes, he
So
does.
Lenny makes a comment about Angie's physical appearance and getting some fine pussy being in the bar tonight.
Yes.
And then as Patrick and Angie are walking out, Lenny says to Angie, "You ever want to get fucked, let me know." And
Yes.
Patrick hits him with his handgun and says, "How's that, motherfucker? Now you know."
then after that, he points his gun at
Big Dave.
and tells him to make him a fucking martini while he's walking out.
Yeah, so he's he really gets riled up and he says, "Make me a fucking martini, you fat fucking retard."
Right.
So one thing that we can see here is that Patrick is very conversant in the argot or patois of like these very
Yes.
rough working
Yes,
class bars, right?
Or these working class people who are casually racist and like homophobic, right? A
Right.
lot of their insults are about that, or they just casually laugh about that. Um,
Yes.
this is the first. So and then they get out, and I like what he does with the directing here. I think the directing throughout is solid to far above average, not quite great yet. So you could say like the thing that might keep this from being a masterpiece is really the limitation of Affleck's vision. It's just
Mhm.
not quite there yet, but it's pretty good. And there are some things that deserve praise. I think he does this when they get out of the bar. You have an arc shot, like adding to the disorientation that you feel as the viewer that Patrick feels after he got amped up in this bar. But I think you it's just worth asking the question, is this a necessary scene, or is this route that they chose to take with this character where he's talking shit all the time, and
Mhm.
the sort of depravity of the characters is really amped up, right?
Yeah,
It's
I personally think that it adds to the film. It's not realism.
no,
It's
it's not. It's not.
more
That's right.
like Patrick is this throwback, like updated Sam Spade figure who's
Right.
silver-tongued and quick-witted
Yeah.
and very good at navigating the kind of quote unquote underworld. Like
Yeah.
that's what makes him a good private investigator.
I can buy that argument. I wonder if it would have been better if they just went more for gritty realism throughout, though. That I think that's a debatable point, at least. That if they had, I mean, it's almost as if Affleck tries too hard to make sure you realize how seedy this world is, and then on top of that, he makes Patrick in these kinds of scenes like unrealistic in a way that I do wonder if it just kind of detracts from the emotional effect of some of the rest of the film. Now, I'm open to the debate there. I can see your point, and there is something just like enjoyable about watching him engage in his repartees. So I mean, I grant that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that Affleck enjoyed writing this kind of witty
Yes.
dialogue, right?
Yeah.
As Damon and Affleck did with Good Will Hunting,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So, yeah. So whether you ultimately like this idea, this kind of throwback to these characters, you can decide that. But clearly, Patrick has that. Although it's interesting that the other major protagonists are much more realistic in how they behave and how they talk, right?
Right.
Like
And
Brisson and Doyle.
Right, but the thing that makes this so weird and jarring to me is you have this Angie who's clearly like kind of like what you would have called a prep in high school, right?
Yes, yeah,
And she's supposedly or I mean acts as though she's a bit repulsed by what she's seen. But yet they get into these situations like you were just in a bar in which they locked the door and were threatening to rape you and to beat the shit out of your boyfriend who had to pull a gun. And then after he pulled a gun, he smacked somebody in the face with his gun, broke out his teeth, and pointed it at the bartender and told him to make a martini. And you get out of that and you're just like, okay, let's go on with the rest of our investigation. It's just, and then there's the other scene, which we'll get to obviously, where he talks to Cheese, which is also like this. It's I don't know. It is jarring because it's so implausible, obviously, that it almost doesn't fit with the rest of the film, which does aim for a kind of realism.
yeah. You wonder what kind of cases they worked on together in the past, right?
Yeah, I mean it's right. I mean, but they make the point of acting as though they never really worked on. I mean, they just worked to find missing people who had skipped out on payments or something.
Right. Like
At
this.
any rate,
Yes.
that's a debate that can run throughout the film. They meet these police officers now,
Yes.
right?
So we're introduced to Nick and Remy Brisson.
Right. And clearly Remy is not impressed with the detectives. He's supposed to meet with them to share information because Jack Doyle told them to, as some kind of courtesy. Brisson's an interesting character too, because we find out that he's from New Orleans, but he's been in the area for, as he says, longer than you've been alive, or longer than before you were born. So who's really more from this area, right? So there is again this sort of class dynamic. Are you an authentic person from this Boston narrative or this Boston area or not?
Yes.
So at any rate, they talk to them and they're basically like, there's this one lead they talk about, which will show up later with this husband and wife or couple.
Yeah. So Leon and Roberta Trent, who are basically just these derelict coke users,
but just absolutely depraved.
And then the quote unquote diddler or pedophile who is named Corwin Earl, and Brisson says they have some kind of Addams Family type thing going on.
Right. And then Patrick's basically like, that's all you've got in 3 days or whatever. And they're like, we've got all of these leads. We've got psychics telling us bullshit or whatever. And he's kind of angry about it. And then Patrick's like, I bet you've heard of Ray Likinski then. And they're like, no, who's Ray or whatever. And importantly, Brisson says he doesn't know who Ray is, right?
That's right.
So this is an important point because it comes up later. So he doesn't know who Ray Likinski is. Patrick tells him about Ray and tells him that Helene was doing bumps of coke with Ray on the night.
And then Remy
went missing.
Yeah, Remy and Nick act utterly shocked that Helene lied to them.
Yes, which is obviously bizarre. And they're like, we're going to go over there now and just like bust her up.
Mm-hmm.
So they go there and they do rip her up. And there's a lot of Ed Harris giving a sort of a pyrotechnic performance of a volatile, this kind of volatile police officer who's getting pissed off at Helene for being so irresponsible and for lying.
Well, before Remy and Nick go to talk to Helene again, we have Patrick and Angie see Bubba, who's also one of Patrick's old friends.
Oh yeah, that's right. So
and Bubba is a unscrupulous drug dealer who likes to say that he's the king of the jungle, and he doesn't fuck around with stupid drug deals. He's smart, intelligent, and he tells Patrick and Angie that Skinny Ray works for Cheese, and this crew that includes Chris Mullen is another person on the crew.
Right. And he'll be important because so they basically say if you see these people or know any information about this, and then that'll come up later. So yeah, and then they have this scene where Brisson and his partner are ripping into Helene, and Helene ends up telling them that how this works. Basically, she and Ray ripped off money from Cheese because they were basically coke mules for Cheese.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And they realized the cops busted people on this one trip, and they thought, I think it was Ray who said, the cops or Cheese will think the cops have the money.
Right.
So they decide to take the money.
Yep. And it's not just a small amount of money. It's $130,000.
And we get some casual, it tells us what kind of people we're dealing with or how they grew up or rough, that she says, I think this is where Helene says, suck a blank dick or cock to be the N word. So again, just like this kind of casual racism and how rude and mean they are to each other. And actually she says, is this where she insults B for being barren?
I think so. Yeah.
Right.
Also Helene, we find out that when she was doing this drug run with Ray for Cheese's crew, she had Amanda with her.
That's right. So she brought Amanda with her.
And she said she complains about how hard it is to be a mother and raise a child. Right. So her solution to this quandary is just to bring her child on drug runs with her.
Right. And it's weird because you almost get the sense that this could be played for, because the way she delivers these lines is actually a little bit moving, where she's like, it's hard to be a single mother. I can't afford these things. But again, wisely, Ben Affleck is showing you both, like every time you almost sympathize with her, he shows you also how rough and in many ways immoral, how much of a bad mother she is at the same time. So he doesn't really let you sympathize too much.
Horrible mother. And also her protestations about how hard it is to be a mother ring extremely hollow, considering that Lionel and B would be more than willing to help her out.
Right. I agree with that. But Amy Ryan is selling these lines as something you should sympathize with. So you can see how you could. And if Ben made different decisions, he could have amped up the sympathy for this character, but he did not. He chose not to, which I think is a good choice. So at any rate, they decide they think obviously Cheese took Amanda to get his money back. Is a pretty straightforward thing here. So they're going to go up and talk to Ray. And Remy says,
I want to note one detail because this will be important at the end. So when Amanda went missing, it was publicized on the news that Amanda had this favorite doll that she always had with her.
Right.
And the mother, Helene, gave this information that the doll's name was Mirabelle. Just put a pin in that because it will be important, but we'll just note that before I forget.
Yes.
Okay.
So they're going to go to Ray's. Remy says, you take her in the car. I can't even stand to be in the car with her, to Patrick. So you get this trip with Patrick, Angie, and Helene, and Helene's sitting in the back seat. And Patrick is trying to talk with her about this guy that she used to date, etc., and about their high school years, because Patrick, I think, was a freshman when she was a senior.
Yep.
And you can see that they are from the same class. So they can talk to each other, and they casually use the word faggot and make fun of things. And she's like, he's a faggot now. And Patrick's like, he was kind of a faggot then, and they're sort of laughing and getting along with each other. And you can see that Angie's sort of disgusted about it and can't really relate to any of this. And in fact, she gets angry because Helene didn't tell anybody about this and didn't go to Cheese. And Helene's like mocking her, like, what am I going to do? Go to Cheese and try to make some deal or something?
Right.
So we get more of Patrick can relate to her and can be friendly with her. And Angie finds her just despicable, loathsome, and cannot.
Yeah. So Angie is very aloof here, right?
Yes.
She just doesn't belong in this world.
Yes.
So when they get to Skinny Ray's, we see that Skinny Ray has been brutally murdered.
Right. And Affleck, in keeping with what he does throughout this film, shows you the grisly torture in exquisite detail. We come with close-ups on like even his bloodied hands, I think, and then his face. And interestingly, I noticed this throughout. There's a lot of the editing's interesting in this film, quite well edited, and you don't get the traditional master medium close-up. Often the edit works from close-up out.
Yeah,
I don't know if you noticed that, but
close-up out and a lot of use of montage.
Yes, but
flashback.
Yeah, but a lot of now the editing, I will say the middle part where it transitions is terrible, and that's
no,
like
I disagree.
Okay, well we'll debate that then.
Okay.
But I think that's a serious flaw. But the editing in general, I quite liked. You could say there are a few pacing issues, but just in the sort of micro, the editing is interesting, and it's interesting that it does go from close-ups out quite often, and it does in this scene, and also it sticks with the sort of grisliness of the film. Affleck's going to show you this depraved world and all of its grisliness, right?
Yes.
So
Helene walks in.
Well, I think Remy says something. So this shows you how hard of a cop Remy is, right? Because he's just kind of looking at it and laughing.
Yeah.
And
they're very hard boiled.
Right. And at some point he they're talking about, well, what happened? And Patrick saying, well, he couldn't tell them where the money was because he didn't know.
That's right.
Because we find out that Helene hid it. And then Remy sort of chuckles and says Ray made poor relationship choices.
Yeah. So they're very worldly and cynical and hard-boiled.
Right. They're inured to this kind of violence.
Yeah. So Helene walks in and sees that Skinny Ray is dead, and she freaks out, understandably, and goes out in the yard, and she says, I don't give a shit about the money anymore. Lets the officers and Patrick know that the 130,000 actually is just buried in the yard right there.
Right. And this is where you feel the most sympathy for Helene's character, right? Where they build up the most for it, because she's starting to talk about how Amanda was hungry before, or said she was hungry before she went to bed, or those were the last words Amanda said to her. And when they drive back, there's no dialogue there, but then she starts crying. She's very upset. She says she'll stop using drugs, just get Amanda, and makes Patrick promise that they'll get Amanda.
Yeah. So interestingly, right before they drive back from Skinny Ray's, Angie makes the comment that maybe they should get the FBI involved. And it's just notable that Remy and Nick are both very much against the FBI becoming involved in this.
No, that's a clue to what's happening.
That is called foreshadowing. Yes.
It was not even foreshadowing, really. But it's a clue to what's happening in plain sight, but it doesn't mean anything until you know what's actually happening. So
right, and then we get this when they get back, the very poignant emotional scene between Patrick and Helene, where Helene says, I know I fucked up. I just want my daughter back. She's crying. She's very doing a great job with the acting, and then Patrick promises her that he will get her daughter back for her.
Right. So, I mean, it goes, we've already said this a couple of times, but it is the case that Amy Ryan's performance is just spectacular. Clearly the best performance in the film. I mean, I think truly award worthy, especially if you've seen Amy Ryan in other films, or she was in The Wire season 2, for example. This is not like Amy Ryan playing Amy Ryan at all. This is a completely different character from other characters, and it's a very believable and well done character.
That's right.
This is when it basically, we get to night or whatever, but then the next important thing that happens is when they meet up with the Remy and Nick to go to Cheese's. Now, here's another thing for people who are interested in this, where the editing's interesting. There are a couple J edits and interesting edits with the audio where they're actually playing the audio of what happened well before, while we're looking at a scene, say like the scenes from the present, the audio's from 10 minutes before or something. And it's the audio is what's catching us up to the visual, right?
And it's allowing them to condense the time in the film and explain, because it's a reasonably convoluted plot, right?
It's Raymond Chandler-esque, one would say. So they're going to, they talk to Remy and Nick and basically say they can handle this. They don't want Remy and Nick to do it. They're going to go in. Patrick knows Cheese's brother better, but does know Cheese a bit. So they go in. Cheese is played by Cheese is Cheese Jean-Baptiste, a Haitian gangster,
a sociopathic Haitian gangster,
as Brissant says, and he is played with glee by I think it was a rapper who played him. But this is another one of the scenes where Patrick shoots off at the mouth in a way that you can say is unbelievable, because they're talking to each other, and
they tell Cheese that they have the money that Cheese is looking for, and they know that Cheese and his crew killed Skinny Ray, but they don't really care. Nobody cares about that. All they want is Amanda back.
And Cheese gets angry at this because he's like, I don't fuck around with kids. Like, if Ray got his, that's fine, because life is, quote, a motherfucker.
Yes, and specifically, and this gives us the title of the movie, Cheese says, some other motherfuckers let fool rob on them. I don't play scrimmage, but I don't fuck with no kids. And if that girl only hope is you, well, I pray for her, because she's gone, baby, gone.
And then, the verbal jousting, that's funny and like very slang written here. And then he wants to see if they have a wire. So he makes Patrick and then Angie lift up their shirts. And this is what pisses off Patrick, because he's basically like, if you disrespect my girl again, and then he goes on saying what he's going to do. And he also says I'm gonna pull your fucking card. And he says if Cheese is lying about not having the girl, he's going to spend all of the money to fuck Cheese over. And he goes through this eloquent list of things.
He's going to bribe cops to go after him, tell other gangsters that Cheese is a CI and a rat. And then he ends it by saying, you're basically going to get cornholed by a bunch of crackers,
quote unquote,
quote unquote, in prison, because from what I heard, you guys that get sent up Concord for killing kids, life a motherfucker.
So he uses his words back to him.
So it's just this old school macho showdown between two kind of dudes trying to outsmart, not just outsmart each other, but just show who's the bigger man here.
It's a kind of verbal
territorial pissing.
But it's completely implausible, because at this point Cheese, who looks sociopathic,
Yeah.
has pulled a gun out before this. So Patrick's talking shit to a guy who has a gun, at least at one point, pointed at him, but it's certainly like quite available. Again, you could argue, and I think it's a reasonable debate, would the film be better if you caught this kind of incredibly implausible verbal jousting and just made it more realistic? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it's entertaining, the dialogue is for sure, but I think it might be a better film without it.
Yeah, I think it's entertaining. I think it adds something to the film. Again, just
Okay.
you have to take it that this isn't realism here.
Yes, it
This
is definitely not.
I do like how Cheese says, if you come in like that again, or if I see you again, I'm going to get discourteous.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, so they finish their meeting with Cheese, they go out and they tell Remy or whatever that they didn't get any deal with Cheese, and Remy basically is like, you're gonna blame yourself from this. How did you fuck this up, etc.
Yes. So Patrick the key here is that Patrick thinks he fucked the deal up, right?
So they still think Cheese probably has Amanda.
Yeah, but
Right.
he was unable to get Cheese to crack, and so he feels some guilt, and Remy lets him know, especially if that child winds up dead, right? You'll never forgive yourself for that.
Right. And so then we see them next, I think, in Jack Doyle's office.
No,
right?
it's the next morning, actually. Remy calls Angie. She takes the call, and he says that Cheese wants to make the deal. So
yes, yeah,
Remy lets them know Cheese wants to make the deal, but importantly, when Cheese called into the police department, they got the recorded transcript, and Jack Doyle looked at it.
Yeah.
So now all of them are in trouble because they got the $130,000. They didn't let Jack know that. They kind of went rogue.
Right. That's why then when we see them in the office, Jack acts as though he's pissed off about this because he's been introduced into this conspiracy that he didn't consent to.
That's right.
And then but he's going to go along with it because he claims this is the best for the kid.
Yeah, and again, this is one of these scenes where he's trying to convey this, like, it's not about me, I don't care. I just want to get the child back, and you guys forced my hand, so you're goddamn right, I'm involved in this now.
Right, and that's why it's important. It's also important, and this comes up later, that he reads this supposed transcript of the phone call between Cheese and Remy, and I actually think they purposely make the dialogue a bit like unbelievable if you pay attention to it when you know it, because the way they have Cheese talk, it's almost like a caricature of a gangster. You have my money, fool.
Yes, that's right.
So yeah, this becomes more important later. But anyway, Doyle chastises them, but then it's basically like, I'm in on this because this is the right thing to do to get Amanda, and that's what he cares about. So they're going to meet at this
abandoned quarry where they'll have this exchange. They'll split up, give Cheese the money, Cheese gives them Amanda, and everything's all good. That's kind of the idea we get going into this.
Right. So, I mean, obviously it's pretty implausible that police officers would go rogue like this, that they would go along with this, but whatever, it works for the film. So they meet up with them at this place. Angie says it doesn't feel right here, right? Like they're going to kill her. That's what she thinks. So they go up and then they split up. So it's Angie and Patrick are together, and Remy and his partner are together, and Angie and Patrick are supposed to get Amanda. Then we hear shooting, and then it's a bunch of running, and it's directed in such a way that it's very disoriented.
Yeah, disorienting. chaotic,
POV shot, like of running through these dark
shaky
woods.
camera.
Yeah, and then we get to they meet up with I think Remy and Nick, and they had heard a splash, I guess, and they ask what happened, and they explained that it went wrong, and they just heard this splash, or she just fell over or something.
Yeah, and when we look down into the water from atop the quarry, you see the doll Mirabelle floating on the top of the water, and
Yes.
Angie runs and jumps off of the cliff
Yes.
into the water below.
Yes, and doesn't come up with anything.
Right.
Because we look at that for a while from like this bird's eye shot. That is, it was quite a cool shot where the little doll where Angie is in the bottom right corner. But then we cut to a hospital,
Mm-hmm.
right, where Angie is sitting on a bed, or like looks like she has bandages on a bruise on her leg, but says she's going to be okay.
Yeah, and she asks Patrick, or she says kind of plaintively, maybe Amanda's still alive, maybe she's holding on somewhere, and then Patrick says, I don't think so.
Right. And then this is when we get the dialogue to the transition.
Narration again.
Yes, to the narration, excuse me, to get into the second part of the film. And this is what I would criticize this as being sloppy structure. There had to have been a way to make this film that didn't require this kind of a transition here.
Well,
that would be my argument.
Okay, so to set up the transition, Patrick does this narration and he says, and like that, she was gone, gives some more details, and then he says, I couldn't stop running it over and over and over in my mind. The vague and distant suspicion that we never understood what happened that night, what our role was, or maybe it was just that, like hundreds of other children who disappear each year and never return, Amanda was even more haunting for never being found.
Right. And
so this is the bookend to the first half of the film. Now, I would say they use the narrative structure of Vertigo, right? Where you have these two almost like self-contained films that have this split right in the middle. And the first half of the film is this noir, this kind of chaotic noir where Patrick and Angie are hired on false premises and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And it's very murky and a chaotic. We're introduced to all of these characters. You feel somewhat out of sorts as the viewer. And then in the second half, it's just this obsession that Patrick has that keeps him going and becomes more personal for him.
But that's, I mean, I like that. I like the comparison, but it's not even really what happens, because Patrick isn't necessarily obsessed. He gets invited by Bubba to go to this house with this, where they find like this guy with the medallion from this new missing kid.
That's right. But the reason he goes in and gets the courage to not just stay in the car is because he is still obsessed by this case.
He still cares. I agree.
Yeah, he's still haunted by it.
What I wonder is is there a way that you could make this film and actually show 10-15 minutes of he's haunted by this? Because you don't get that from this, right? You just get this narration. It tells you that Doyle retired. He took all of the blame for that. He insisted upon taking all of the blame for what happened. He retired. Chris got killed, etc. So we're told what happened.
Angie
here.
Still cries about
Angie
case.
Cries, and Angie,
their relationship is clearly
is not going well. And we also are told about this Johnny Pietro kid who's missing, and we're told about this medallion that he had.
Yes, the 7-year-old boy. Yeah,
right. The 7-year-old boy was important because this is what propels the second half of the plot, at least for a little bit. I think it would have been better if Affleck could have, the script writer could have figured out a way to put 10 minutes here where we see Patrick like obsessed with this or not being able to let it go or doing something. I don't know how you would do that exactly. I just think it just feels jarring when you're watching it. It feels almost half-assed, like you had something here and you just couldn't figure it out. So you're like, we'll just do narration.
Yeah, I mean, but you started the film with narration.
Yeah, but starting a film with narration, you know, it feels much less. What do you want to say? It's less conspicuous or something. It's like, okay, you started, the narrator is going to tell us something about what we're doing, where we are. I mean, you don't even need the narration. You could cut the narration from the start. I like it. But when you're doing the narration like here, it seems as though it's a failure of writing. It's the easy way out. And it just seems a bit jarring. And generally speaking, not always, I would say generally speaking, narration you would like to avoid it. And it's interesting because, for example, Blade Runner had narration put in, which is a neo-noir sci-fi film. It had narration put in, which Harrison Ford was very angry about and which Ridley Scott fought against. And it does make the movie worse, although it makes it easier to understand because you can watch it without the narration. And it's actually, I think, better without the narration.
Okay, so noir films often use narration.
I agree.
That's a tool. And furthermore, this narration here.
But this film only uses narration twice. Yes, it uses it at the beginning and here.
This narration, it doesn't make things more understandable.
No, I agree.
In fact, Patrick's narration is precisely, it's like we couldn't fake. I have no idea what I was a part of here. He thought he was figuring shit out and then it just collapsed.
Right, but it tells and doesn't show. That's the thing, right? It tells you what happened in the aftermath of this. And and I think if you can show and not tell, generally that's the better option.
I like the Vertigo angle.
Okay, right? So that fair enough. I find it a little jarring. It feels kind of lazy. I would rather they show me it because when we get back into this, it takes me a while to get back into the narrative. It feels as though I'm entering like a new movie. And they kind of tried to half-ass connect it. But it doesn't, it's not even Vertigo. There's a reason for that. The setup like that, the structure makes more sense to me in Vertigo than it does here because this isn't like a new narrative. It's continuing the narrative.
The second half of the film is where all of these clues and characters and the dialogue that's preceded starts to make sense and come together, right?
Yeah, I
it bears fruit. And I think having it almost as two separate films, I think that works well with this, setting this up, but it's basically like The Big Sleep where you can't follow any of the narrative. And then the second half where it's more, I think it has more of a personal feel, right? In the second half, it's more about these individual characters and specifically a couple of important choices by Patrick.
Sure, but I mean, I guess I would say I don't see the justification for this. To me, it feels lazy and maybe as though they might have had something there and they cut it for time and condensed it and had narration over it, or
I think that's accurate. I think they probably had like 20 or 30 minutes of scenery or of shots that they
and just turned it into a montage and narrated over it. I mean, whatever. It's not I think it's bad, but it's not a ruinous sin or anything.
It's an interesting decision.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so it's debatable. At least we apparently don't agree on it. But the important thing is that we get this information about this kid who's missing that
Yeah,
the media care about now.
right. He's the new big media story.
Right.
It was Amanda, now it's Johnny Pietro, who was went missing and was last seen wearing this medallion of Saint Christopher.
Right. And Bubba meets Patrick and tells him that he's got this trip that he wants Patrick to go on. Now, this is also something that you get in movies that never happens in real life, which I dislike, which is, dude, I have to show you something, but I'm not going to tell you what we're doing. And the person's like, okay, I'll go with you. I mean, why wouldn't Patrick, or why wouldn't Bubba just say, hey, I think I found those people. Will you come with me and we can sort this out?
It's also the first time that Patrick doesn't understand the argot of the underworld, because Bubba tells him to get his toast. And Patrick's like, toast? What are you talking about? He's like, your gun, motherfucker. Your gun.
Yeah,
that's right. Pack the heat, man.
So Patrick goes with them, and it turns out that he's going to do this coke deal, and it's these two, what were their, I forget their names.
The Trets, yes. Leon and Roberta.
With the pedophile kid who might be there.
Yes.
And so Patrick decides to come in with him. And this is another one of those scenes which is even worse the next time they go into the house, that's just showing you this lurid underworld, this coked out, crazy looking, unwashed, unkempt dude who answers the door, and Bubba just like busts his way into the house and is like looking around. Patrick goes in with him, and he gives a little bit of coke to this guy whose wife then comes in. His wife is this morbidly obese, very unpleasant looking woman who wants some of the cocaine, right? So they're basically these absolute coke fiends, and Bubba's giving them shit, having Patrick count the money, right? And he's kind of looking around, and the woman's getting angry about that, getting suspicious or whatever.
Yeah.
But then finally they go out into the hallway, and I believe that's when he sees the pedophile, or is that when they're leaving? Anyway, she pulls a gun on him too.
Yes, she pulls a gun on Bubba.
Right.
And then Bubba tells Patrick to shoot the bitch.
Right.
Patrick pulls his gun and puts it on the back of her head, but does not shoot her. Yes. And then we see, like, Patrick looks up and sees Corwin upstairs.
Yes.
Over the railing. And Corwin...
With the medallion.
With the medallion. And Corwin is he looks as though he's missing a chromosome, right? Yes. Like he's mentally retarded. He has this shirt that's too small. It like only comes down to his belly button. Just a very disturbing looking individual.
Yeah, this is a disturbing underworld that you don't want to believe exists, right?
Right. Yes.
So they leave, and then we get Remy and Nick are meeting up with Patrick, talking about what he saw, and he's like, "Are we gonna wait for SWAT?" Mm-hmm. And Remy's like, "You saw this medallion, did you not?" Like,
and Patrick importantly does not confirm that he saw the medallion. He says, "I definitely saw Corwin Earl."
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
And then Remy just says, "We're not waiting. Fuck it. We're going in."
And I think this whole scene is very well directed and very compelling. So Remy's going to the back, Nick is going to the front, and we hear like 3 shots, and then it goes silent. Like the soundtrack goes silent, and it just is like, it really puts you into this disoriented sort of world where this guy's been shot. He's holding his neck. He falls over eventually on the ground, and Patrick runs toward him to try to get help. Calls the backups.
It's quite graphic. There's blood just squirting from this guy's neck. He's clearly like definitely quite injured.
Yes. And I would say, like, the way he acted this scene is very compelling. And then Patrick goes in. Now, this is where you could say again, like, I'm not going in. This guy just got shot. He's a cop. Patrick decides to go in, though.
Yes, and
And
upon entering, he finds the old man is dead and has a
right.
bullet hole through his chest.
Yes. And I couldn't figure out what happened. I guess is the idea Remy shot him from outside.
Yeah,
I mean, because Patrick's shooting, but it's, you know, he doesn't know what he's even shooting at.
right. So it's unclear exactly who shot the old man, but he's
Right.
dead.
Yeah.
And then Patrick goes upstairs.
Yes, and this
And
is
it's a just very disturbing scene upstairs where we have Corwin Earl crouched on the floor saying it was an accident, basically muttering it was an accident. Patrick goes into a bathroom and this is a just dank, dirty, dilapidated bathroom. In the sink we see there's water and bloody underwear.
yes.
And then he looks in the bathtub and we just see like the face of Johnny Pietro, who's clearly been dead for a little while.
Right. Then Patrick immediately hurls.
Yes.
And we get this very effective editing that's like a pulsating editing where we go black, then we come up to something, then we go black again. It's very, again, it's disorienting. Yep. It feels as though we're in the head of Patrick and we're angry, we're confused, we're upset. And he goes and he assassinates Corwin.
Yes,
he points his gun to the back of his head.
Shoots
Corwin
him point
says,
blank, and
wait or something, and then just shoots him. And then he makes his way toward the door. Remy shoots the woman, and then they go outside.
Yes, and then they're giving statements.
Yes,
and then Patrick goes to see Nick in the hospital.
Right,
and he's visited by Angie.
Right, so we get this shot. Affleck going for the obvious here, perhaps, but I still like the shot where Patrick is staring at this kind of like window that ends up reflecting his shadow back to him, clearly depicting the duality of Patrick, and he's grappling with what he's done and trying to he's grappling morally with what has happened, and he's worried that he did the wrong thing, or at least he's not sure about what he did and
right.
if it was right.
And Angie is very happy. I wouldn't say happy is probably not the right word, but she tells him she's proud of him.
Yes.
She says they told me what happened. I'm proud of you. That man killed a child. He had no right to live.
Yeah,
you did what you had to do.
This is where like I feel as though Angie's just here for moral narrative purposes, because this just seems like a very implausible thing for somebody to say to her boyfriend in this situation. It just
well, that's unrealistic, but also it's the idea that these police officers are telling Angie, yeah, we're not going to file this report, but here's what actually happened. Patrick actually assassinated this pedophile.
Yes, it's just, it doesn't strike as realistic. I do wonder if you had a better actress here, would this have seen a bit more compelling? Because Moynihan just can't the way she delivers these lines. It's kind of almost like upbeat, like, yeah, I'm proud of you. You shot him. You had no right to live. No qualms about what she's saying. No concerns about it whatsoever.
She doesn't bring any immediacy or gravity to the dialogue. It's kind of superficial.
What if you put like Michelle Williams or something in this role, right?
Well, if you put Michelle Williams in any role, it's going to be good.
Yes, that is true. That is a fact. So then we have Patrick says he's going to stay here for a while. So Angie leaves, and then he's drinking with Remy Brisson. Remy Brisson at this point is drunk, drinking from a bottle, some kind of bottle.
He's drinking some rum from a bag, and
Yes.
we can see that Patrick is clearly wrestling with his decision. He tells Remy, my priest says shame is God telling you what you did was wrong. Remy says, fuck him. And then Patrick says, murder's a sin. Remy says, depends on who you do it to.
Right. Now this is important because it's setting up the what you would say the deontological versus the utilitarian moral framework. So the deontological framework is there are just these kinds of rules that you have to follow regardless of the consequences.
Yes.
Utilitarianism, on the other hand, is a consequentialist philosophy that says, you know, you have to take into account what happens with your act. So if it leads to better results, even if it might seem immoral, the act itself, it is moral.
Yes.
And that's the dilemma that we're confronted and will be confronted with later. And Patrick seems to be moving toward the deontological view that
that perhaps is informed by his Catholicism.
Right. So
and because he says his response to Remy is that's not how it works. It is what it is, right? So there are just these moral laws that you have to follow, whether they lead to positive or negative outcomes, because that's the way the universe is, right?
Right. And Remy is taking this more utilitarian bullshit. What matters is how is it helping the right people?
No, I will note that Ed Harris just knocks this scene out of the stadium.
This is Ed Harris just going fucking gonzo acting, right?
Right.
He tells this story about planting evidence, right?
Yes.
So he's basically like, I don't give a shit. You have to take a side. I'm on the side of kids. He tells this story about planting evidence on this shitty dad whose kid was just trying to get affirmation for doing math tables, even though he lived in this cockroach rat infested shithole.
Right.
Importantly, Remy says that they got the information for this from their man Ray Lakansky, right?
Yes, who couldn't rat people out fast enough.
Right, and the first or second time I saw this, I don't think I made sense of what he was saying right here, but this becomes important.
Right.
Because if we remember, he said he didn't know Ray Lakansky.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so Patrick asked him, was that the right thing to plant the evidence? And then Remy responds, fucking A, you got to take a side. You molest a child, you beat a child, you're not on my side. If you see me coming, you better run because I'm going to lay you the fuck down.
Right.
Easy.
So Remy's on the side of everything's for the good of kids. Whatever helps kids is the right thing. Whatever hurts them is the wrong thing.
Yes. And then Remy asks him, would you do it again? That is, clip Corwin Earl. And then Patrick says, no. And then Remy asks him, well, does that make you right? And Patrick says, I don't know. I don't know if I'm right.
This is, I think Patrick's view about these things is some kind of humility. He doesn't know, and he says this at the end too, that he doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't know what the right thing is. He's sort of the confused person who realizes that it's a really complicated world and it's a complicated question.
Right. And Remy is very much committed to this Old Testament view of justice. He's on the side of the angels. When you're on the side of angels, you can, violate legal human laws, right, for the greater good.
That's right. So then we cut to a funeral. So it turns out that Nicholas, his partner, died from the wounds of the shooting. And we go to this funeral. Patrick and
one important detail, as Patrick's walking in this funeral, a random officer comes up to him and says, nice job on fucking Corwin Earl. So we get the idea here that everyone is happy with Patrick,
Yes.
except for Patrick. Patrick
Yes.
feels this ambivalence and this shame, but
Right.
all of the other officers are like, yeah, that's dude, if you get the opportunity, you kill a pedophile.
Right. You did the right thing. And so he has this brief conversation with Remy where he asks him about what he said last night, and I've been thinking about it, and Remy tells him to fucking forget it.
Mhm.
And then Patrick's like, what if I can't? So Patrick is still dwelling on this. Remy wants him to just completely forget it, although it's not clear. It doesn't seem that Remy knows what he's actually dwelling on, because
Right.
we know what he's dwelling on is, why did Remy lie about not knowing Ray?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's when Patrick sees this other cop who was one of his friends, the guy who actually plays Omar in The Wire, and asks him, he wants to talk to him about Remy. So the guy says, you have to buy me dinner. So they go to this dinner, and Patrick's asking him about Remy, and we find out that Remy married a prostitute, for one thing.
Yep.
And they
And
make some jokes about that.
Captain Doyle brought him in 1972, so he's been there for a long time.
Right.
And we also find that Remy knew that Cheese got robbed before Cheese even knew that he was robbed.
Right. So Patrick's starting to put this together, right?
That's right.
He's starting to, well, as it turns out, it's only a blinkered view of what really happened, but he's putting together that Angie and Angie have been lied to.
Yes.
By Lionel and the others. And so he calls Lionel at this point, right? And he says that they need to meet with him because they know like the bullshit's going on and they're going to call the police otherwise. And we get this kind of, I think, montage before
they're at the bar,
where it starts to tell us kind of what Patrick is thinking happened, right?
Yes, and it's also this conversation between Lionel and Remy, where Remy's telling him, you leave your house and you're an enemy. We take our secrets to the grave.
Yeah, you die with your secrets, right?
So now we know that there's this long-standing relationship between Remy Brisson and Lionel McCready.
Right, and they find out when they meet with Lionel, who ends his 23-year streak of sobriety by having a few shots, and he starts to tell them what happened.
Specifically, 3 cutties and a tall boy. I don't know what that is, but
don't know either.
Right. A lot of alcohol.
So the way he tells the story is basically that he and Remy decided that they were going to abduct Amanda, or they were going to take Amanda because Helene was such a terrible mother, and they would get the money, everybody would get paid on time, and Amanda would have a few fun days or whatever. No big deal. Nobody gets hurt. And it was just this tragic accident that she ended up falling.
Yeah. So they would, in the scenario that Lionel lays out, they would only take Amanda for a few days.
Right.
They would get paid for it. Amanda would have this nice vacation, and then Helene would have her daughter back. And the idea was, as he's telling it, is maybe Helene would change,
would learn a lesson too.
Yes.
Yeah. And he tells this story about how Helene and Dottie were watching Amanda. They went to the beach. It was 100 degrees out. They left her in the car to smoke some J's with some guys. And by the time they got back, it was a couple hours later, and Amanda was so hot, she felt like a roasted chicken, basically. And this, again, giving you more information that
and also
a terrible mother.
And Lionel is played by Titus Welliver, best known for his role as Bosch on the eponymous Amazon series. And he does a great job in this scene.
Yes,
it's very well done.
Actor. Yes. And then somebody with a mask comes in yelling that they're going to rob the place and telling people to shut up and quit talking.
Yes.
And specifically starts looking at Lionel and saying, what are you saying? You better shut up or whatever.
Yeah, you like to run your mouth.
Right. And then we get the sense that I don't know if I don't remember who I thought this was the first time, but it seems clear that Patrick realizes that this is Rennie Brisson under this mask,
Yes.
who's getting angry at Lionel for what he thinks for divulging what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then Patrick starts yelling out loud, Amanda McCready was taken by Rennie Brisson, and Brisson's getting confused at this point, and Lionel's yelling at him, I told him, and what we realize is that he's telling Rennie that he didn't tell him the real story.
Right. That the secret is still safe. And Brisson realizes this and kind of puts his gun down. And then the bartender shoots him twice in the back.
Yeah, so he takes 2 shots through. There's a chase scene, whatever, but we end up on a roof where Remy's slouched over against some windows or something on the roof, and Patrick, I think, yells at him or says something to him, and
he's like, "What did you do?" Right. So Patrick still thinks Amanda is dead, and he's trying to figure out how did this happen, and then Remy Brisson's last words before he passes away are, "I love children."
Yeah, he passes away in this sort of beautiful sunsets just beginning to break over Boston, and we see him. Yeah,
and also Remy's so hard boiled that as he's dying on the roof, he makes the crack. That bartender wasn't fucking around, was he?
Yes, he does. Right. Yeah, so Remy's dead. Then we cut to Patrick's getting interviewed by the police who think he was in on the conspiracy.
Right.
And he's saying, no, why would I be in on this? Whatever, and that, how did you know about this? And he's saying that he knew because of all of these details, and also because he read the transcript.
Yeah, the police showed him a transcript of it was either Cheese or Chris imitating Cheese.
Right. And the cops ask if it was like a 911 call, and he says no. This person called Remy Brisson, and it was recorded, and they have the transcript, and they tell him that they don't record calls that come in.
That's right.
And then he acts as though he must have been confused, because he doesn't want them to know that he knows something now.
Right. But now he puts everything together.
Right.
This is when we figure out it was like Remy shot Chris Mullen because Chris knew too much. They took him out. He realizes that Amanda is in fact not dead, but that they actually plan to permanently kidnap her and give her a new home.
Namely with Jack Doyle.
With Jack Doyle. So this leads to the kind of final confrontation, if you will, where Patrick
is driving with Angie to what we find out is Jack Doyle's house, and she's not happy about. She seems clearly not happy about what they're going to do, and asks him if he's sure, I think, and he says no. Right, basically he's not sure, but he's going to go there to see what's going on. She doesn't come with him. He asks her to come with him. She doesn't want to. Mm-hmm. So he walks up, he sees Jack Doyle outside, and then we see Amanda running out of the house. So now we put everything, this is when we put everything together as the viewer. We're finally realized Remy and Jack and Lionel were all in on this. B was not, to kidnap Amanda and give her a better home with Jack Doyle.
Yeah, to permanently abduct her, right? To
Correct.
Adopt her, put her in a different
home. Then Jack says to Patrick, now you know.
Yeah.
Right. And then they get into the dialogue in which the major moral conflict is something is adjudicated, if you will, because Jack is saying, she would have a better life here. Basically, like, this is the right thing to do, to let her stay with me. You have a chance to do the right thing. If you don't, you're going to regret it. And he also says, what else does he say there?
When he makes a point of letting Patrick know that maybe right now at his age he doesn't realize it,
Oh, right.
but
Yeah.
when you're older, when you're my age,
Yes, but I know what I was going to say is that he says that the reason that Patrick hasn't called the cops yet is because part of him thinks that it's the right thing to do is just to let Jack keep the child, who's clearly in a more loving home, and it's clearly illustrated that Jack and his wife care a lot about the kid and are providing a better home for the kid.
yes.
But
Then,
Patrick retorts that he can't do that, that
yes.
he's not going to do that because what he would regret is having to say he's sorry to a child or to an adult who asks him, why did you allow the kidnappers to keep me? You knew, and you didn't bring me back to my biological mother.
Yes, and that's the kind of important point of Patrick's retort to Jack. So he says, like all of the snacks and the outfits and the family trips don't matter, right?
Right.
They stole this girl. Patrick knew it, and he didn't tell her about it. He didn't do what he promised that he was going to do. And then Patrick says, and maybe that grown woman will forgive me, but I'll never forgive myself for doing that.
Right. So Patrick's making basically the argument that the biological mother, that's just like, that's how things work, that's the law, that's the thing to do. You can't make these arguments about, well, the kid's better here. And importantly, it actually turns into a class debate.
Yes.
Because so he's gonna he goes back to talk to Angie.
Yes.
And she's upset, and she's like, I saw her, she's happy. Yep. I don't know how she saw that she was happy from her position, but she claims she did.
But so Angie makes what is the utilitarian argument as well. She's better off, she's happier. And then Patrick responds, why? Because he's got money and he makes her sandwiches, right? So there's this kind of cultural and class kind of argument creeping into here.
Right.
And then also Patrick says, I think importantly, you can't ask me to do something that I can't do, right? Like he feels that he doesn't have a choice in this matter.
Yeah.
And then Angie lets him know that if he does make the decision to call the police, she will hate him and their relationship is over. Right.
So again, Angie's there to play the foil, and she's going to be out if he does this, but he's going to do this because it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
And this obviously follows upon his executing the other guy and feeling bad about it and saying that was the wrong thing to do, even if it had maybe better consequences.
And because he does mention that to Jack, that look, if you had a problem with this,
you
call social services.
Right.
So, you don't get to play God because you have money and a more loving environment or whatever.
So again, Patrick's now doing he's committed to the deontological.
Which is, it's a
moral principle.
I think common trope in the noir literature and noir film is this kind of code that the detectives live by. As the best example is The Maltese Falcon, where Sam Spade turns over his woman because he knows she committed murder.
Right. So in some ways, you could almost read Angie Gennaro as a deviation of the femme fatale who's attempting to seduce our hero from the code, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
I think it doesn't
She's
work.
the Bridget O'Shaughnessy.
Exactly. So she's she's the last temptation that the hero has to overcome to do the right thing. I think the problem here is that it's mostly Michelle Monaghan, just not a great actress. So there's not a lot of gravity to her performance. And I end up just finding her kind of more annoying than seducing. And I find it actually makes me like Patrick's decision more, not to feel there's a greater dilemma.
Yeah, because she does kind of have a condescending,
Right.
I'm better than these people attitude. And I think it's perfectly okay for people like me to play God and come in here and steal children from their biological
Yeah,
parents.
and that is interesting because we have a combination of the deontological versus utilitarian principles and class criticisms or class conflict, right? Because yes, it's not just that Angie is a dedicated utilitarian or something. It's also that she has these class prejudices and believes that people of the upper class are better than people like Helene and therefore more fit to raise the children and should be able to because it would be better for Amanda.
Yes, and so and Patrick is the only major protagonist who's actually grown up in this neighborhood and
Right.
is familiar with it, and so he's not just being a deontologist. He's also, you could say, like kind of some sort of a guardian of that neighborhood, right?
Yeah,
Of their interest, protecting them from these interlopers who think that they're better than they are.
right. He's more sympathetic. We got this sense that he did have some empathy with Helene, and therefore this isn't just deontological, it's also this connection to the community and to the people that Angie does not have. So he calls the cops come and take Amanda from Jack, and we find out that well, I think I don't remember if we're told that he goes to jail or whatever, but the end. So, but that's not the end. So you
That's
could,
the penultimate scene.
right,
Yeah.
and you could end it here,
Yes.
and it's great that they didn't because again, this is Ben Affleck and the script writer, but ultimately Affleck has the say here because he's the director. Makes the decision to make this even more ambivalent or make a viewer more ambivalent than they may have been.
Yes.
Now we see there's a scene where we see it's kind of contrived in which Angie is still in the house and we realize that she's left Patrick, whatever.
Yes.
Okay, so she's left him. But then the movie ends with Patrick talking to, at her apartment, Helene, who's
Yes.
getting ready for a date with somebody who saw her on some show.
Mm-hmm.
And she's, same as she ever was, right?
Right.
Talking with like the sort of sensibilities of her class, etc. And also, Patrick asks her, does Dottie, or she says Dottie's going to babysit for her. And Patrick asks, does Dottie know that? And then Helene laughs and says she will in like 5 minutes. And she's drinking a beer at this point, getting ready for this date. And then Helene says kind of casually, unless you want to babysit for me. And Patrick agrees to.
Yes. And then as Helene walks out for her date, she doesn't even give Amanda a hug. She's
Right.
really just seems uninterested.
Very uninterested. And then we get Patrick sits on the couch with Amanda.
And Amanda has her doll. Patrick looks at her and says, "Is that a Mirabelle?" And then Amanda says, "Annabelle." Right. So we find out that this doll that is her, like literally like the most important thing in the world to her most important object. Her mom doesn't even care enough about her throughout the entire film to know the actual name of the doll and had butchered it and called it Mirabelle.
Right. And yeah, so and we have this scene where Patrick and Amanda are separated. There's great distance between them watching the television. And that's how we end, realizing that Helene didn't give much of a shit about her daughter. It's shown to us and it's revealed by this lack of knowledge about the doll. And Patrick is stuck. You get the sense that this is like the scene of, this is the reality of Patrick's decision. This is what happened because of it. Now she's with her mother and her mother really doesn't give a shit about her. And Ben Affleck saying think about it. Was this actually the right thing to do? And you can see that you have because Patrick's basically the hero of this story, you want to believe, and you're prone to believe, that what he did is the right thing to do, because that's just how storytelling works. The character whose perspective you take, you generally sympathize with that character.
Right. So they go out of their way to put on the screen to make it difficult for you to agree with Patrick's decision.
Right. And I saw one critic compared this to $1 Million Baby, because there's a morally challenging question at the heart of the film. In $1 Million Baby, Eastwood plays a trainer who helps an injured boxer commit suicide. And that's the moral debate at the center of that film. But as the reviewer noted, in $1 Million Baby, Eastwood goes out of his way to make the decision seem as though it was the right decision. The whole film set up to make that case. Whereas in Gone Baby Gone, Affleck actually goes out of his way to muddy it up and make it very unclear that it was the right decision, which I think illustrates Affleck's intelligence here. He's making a very challenging and, in some sense, viewer unfriendly film, because it ends with this painful realization that Helene's even a worse mother than we thought. And that makes Patrick's moral decision unfulfilling.
Yes.
Or you could argue it's unfulfilling.
Right. Not only is she a worse mother than we thought, but at this point, it's clear she has no ability to change, right?
Right. She's not going to change. Yeah.
Yes. And then that harkens back to the opening narration, right? That it's the things that you can't choose that make you who you are. She's just a product of the neighborhood, her family, right? And that's just the way that it is.
Yep.
And then we're left wondering, well, was it just the way it was for Patrick, right? He's just a product of that neighborhood. He's going to side with the neighborhood. That's just how it is.
Yeah. So there's that class angle to it. And then there's the more abstract philosophical debate that one could have. And in fact, I think if one were an intro to philosophy professor setting up a debate between utilitarianism and deontology, which is a common debate that people set up, this film would be a very good way to set it up, right? It's so, it is the center, at least it's the sort of intellectually obvious center of the film. I think the class stuff is also there and is a very important theme, but this is sort of what would you say, the more gaudy theme, the one that's in your face, that's the challenging theme, is the deontology versus the utilitarian perspectives.
Yeah. And then there's a way out of that with some rule-based utilitarianism, right?
Yes, there is indeed. And plenty of philosophers have debated this topic and will continue to debate it. In the context of the film, the debate, of course, is one, and it's good that also you do end up, I think, sympathizing with Remy. So there is, Remy's a hard ass, but he's somebody you do think you would want on your side, and you can see his point of view. He's not morally bankrupt. He does care about children, and he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah, and you can see Jack's point of view. He lost his daughter.
Yes.
He really wants to. You can see that he and his wife are very devoted to Amanda. They really do want to give her a better life.
Yeah, and actually, that reminds me, there's this theme with Jack Doyle's character that could be like a third great theme of the film. I think if it had been played a little differently, and this is where I think, again, Freeman's choice here to play the character as he does makes it a little less prominent or interesting than it could be, because one of the major points, as you noted, is that Doyle's constantly trying to say he's doing it only for the kid.
Right.
And at the end, he says to Patrick, nobody knows why they do what they do. We all look at life through our own window,
Right.
right? And he does confess, maybe I'm doing this for me
Yeah.
at one point here. So there's this kind of theme that he's the representation of, that actually people don't know why they do what they do. And they're just trying to rationalize it because they're looking at life through their own window, which
Right.
is an interesting theme that you can see play out. But
it is, and also then you have this interesting, I guess, dilemma with Jack's character of, was he doing it because he cared about
right,
abstractly about children and
right,
justice, or because he wanted to replace his own
yeah, because
child
he
and fill
lost,
that need?
right, exactly. And that's a theme that, yeah, it's just, I think, like, Freeman just makes this character this kind of unbelievably avuncular stoic or something. Just, it's just, I just think to myself, what if you had like, either he decided or you had a different actor who played it as a much more emotionally fraught character, a character who lost his child and is aware of the depths of depravity of humanity and aware that his own motives are often hidden from him, right? Because you could have that. I just think because, so Bresson actually illustrates that better because he's played by Harris, who gives a more volatile performance, whereas again, Freeman, I just think it's one of the weak points in the film is just the way Freeman decided to go with this, or
Yeah.
Affleck wanted him to go. I don't know.
Also, it's interesting because Brisson is a character where his motivation is transparent, right?
Well, at
He
least he
really,
thinks it is.
I think that it is. I think it's just Brisson at some point was just like, fuck it. I am on the side of justice. I'm going to throw out these legal niceties and do whatever it takes to further actual justice, not legal justice, but real transcendent justice. The other characters, their motives are a little bit like, so Patrick, is he doing this because he's trying to redeem himself for clipping Corwin Earl? Right? Is that why he decides that he has to
Right.
go this route? And then, obviously with Angie, we have is she doing this for the sake of the child or out of this more condescending kind of view that she has of
Right.
these kind of people, right?
Right.
So it is interesting. I do, yeah. Brissant's kind of a fascinating character.
Right. Well,
He's more id, right? He is what he is at this point.
well, I mean, I wouldn't say he's exactly it because he's devoted to a righteous cause. He's like pure super ego. He's
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
taking sides. He's pure morally righteous. That's his motivation. And if you went that route, again, how much better would it have been if Jack Doyle was played by somebody who illustrated the sort of darkness of his own motivations to the audience better? Because Freeman's playing Freeman here, playing this guy who is, you just think he's so noble, and he gets mad, but when he gets mad, it seems to have nothing but purpose to it. You
Mhm.
don't get the sense of a turbulent man who has this wounded past and who's fully aware of his own maybe dark motives. I wish that would have come out better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he he's too noble and one dimensional,
Yeah, and that,
and then that makes it so when you get to this last scene where he's does admit that maybe I'm doing it for myself, but from the viewer's perspective, you can't believe that. You're like, of course he's doing it for the right reasons.
yeah, and it's interesting that it in some ways it kind of sucks the emotional impact of the last that's the penultimate scene, or close to penultimate at least, the scene with Freeman and Amanda. It actually kind of ends up sucking any emotion out of that because Freeman, you just don't feel the depths of his desire to have Amanda here. Right, like
Yes.
I wasn't that moved by that scene. I mean, I was intellectually riveted by it, but I wasn't emotionally moved by the scene in which the cops take Amanda. You could imagine again somebody looking incredibly wounded and almost destroyed. This was their last chance for this happy ideal of a family that they had, and it's completely ruined now.
Yeah, agreed. Another way that you could play that kind of last, penultimate scene would be if you had a better actress than Michelle Monaghan, you could just have the confrontation be between Patrick and Angie and
Yes, yes, they
relegate
could have done that. Yeah.
Jack to kind of this, we just observe what happens, but there's not actually dialogue between them.
Right, right.
Right. Instead of having the two confrontations that Patrick has.
I think the two work, and it would work better if it obviously it's not that Morgan Freeman's a bad actor at all. He's a supremely gifted actor, but I think he's probably miscast here, and or Ben Affleck just I don't know what he does with his direction here. Maybe he didn't want to direct Morgan Freeman because he's like, that's fucking Morgan Freeman.
Right.
Who knows, right? Whereas with Moynihan, it's much easier to know what happened. It's just like Moynihan's a fine actress, but she's limited, and she's not. She does not have the chops of Titus Welliver or of Casey Affleck or of Amy Ryan. So she pales in comparison.
Yeah, she looks like she's out of her depth when
Right.
you're playing against these forceful
Right.
and just
And who the
gifted
person who
actors.
plays B. McCready gives a wonderful performance. Dottie is wonderful performance. Really, everybody in here except for Jack's Freeman giving just to me an off-key performance, and then Moynihan just a little bit more lightweight.
All right, so let's just do a kind of final assessment and then we'll conclude. So how would you rate it 1 to 10?
Yeah, it's tough because it's such a rewatchable film for the moral dilemma, and it is pretty well directed. I would say that Affleck lacks total visual control, but some of the editing is really interesting and compelling, and it's very well directed. It's clearly the director has command of the material here. So I think I would give it an 8. The script is very good. The moral dilemma is really interesting. Affleck makes the important decision to make it even more compelling and intellectually challenging. In fact, he does that whenever he can. Amy Ryan's performance stands out as just spectacular. And it's one of those films that stays with you. So anytime you get a film like that, that's good. Now, I would say it's not in the masterpiece realm because I think the structure is messed up. The going from the first half to the second half is really unfortunate. I would have liked 15 minutes of footage there that tells me that shows me instead of tells me what happened. I think that would have been more powerful. I think going with realism all the way through would have worked better and would have made it a more compelling film. And I think Affleck's not quite in the league of great directors at this point. And so the visual style, although again, very good, 7 out of 10 or something just for the visual, it's not expert. Yeah. And who can blame Affleck? This is the first film he directed, which it's an achievement for a first film.
Yeah, I think I would go with an 8. I think it shows that Affleck is not just a talented screenwriter, but also a talented director. The visuals are interesting, not as accomplished as other directors. I agree with that. I suppose you could see the decision to create basically 2 films and have the narration there as an ad hoc solution to what was presumably some post-production issue, right? That they didn't know how
Possibly,
to,
yeah.
maybe how to put it all
I don't know
together.
if that's true. That's speculation.
Yeah,
But
that's speculation, but I could see that. For me, the most glaring flaw is Michelle Monaghan.
yeah,
That Angie character is the most off-putting character to me.
yeah.
She just doesn't bring the kind of gravity to it that I would like to see from. I mean, she's basically the co-protagonist, but really just is in the shadows, right? Most of the time.
Yeah,
Um,
so you wonder how much of that is the script didn't do her any favors, or how much is they cut scenes from her because they weren't as good as other scenes, right?
yeah,
You
judging
always
by
wonder that.
right other films and the first season of True Detective, I just don't think Moynihan can bring it.
Oh, I agree with that. I'm just
Oh, you mean if
wondering.
they had more material with her that they decided to cut?
Yeah, because she ends, it ends up when the finished product, you think like the script does her no favors, but I do wonder, was there more, did she have 15, 20 minutes more footage that just ended up getting cut because, yeah, she can't bring it the way that the other actors can. And so,
Yeah.
of course, if you're in the editing room, you're like, I want more with Ed Harris, more with Casey Affleck, and less with Moynihan.
And personally, I enjoyed the artificial ersatz dialogue from uh Casey Affleck. I think it adds something to the film. It's very gritty and realistic, has a lot of graphic scenes, and that adds a little entertainment to it, perhaps. So you're not entirely immersed in this.
Yeah, but so it's interesting because what I was thinking about is Chinatown, which is a
Mhm.
neo-noir, of course, probably the most famous neo-noir and the best neo-noir, in which Jake Gittes really doesn't use. I mean, he has a few things but he does. They don't. They're Polanski, when the script writer, who's I that's embarrassing that I can't remember the script writer because it's one of the great scripts in the history of film. But they don't do that with Geddes, right? And I actually think that I really like that they had the restraint to do that because, yeah, it's entertaining to have the detective pop off at the mouth eloquently, but I actually think it just ends up detracting from the realism of the film.
Yeah, because we always feel like, even though what's going on in the actual, like on the film, is Patrick doesn't get it, we always feel as though he's going to figure shit out and that he's in control.
Right, because this ends up making him, unlike Jake Gittes, who's in over his head, and we feel that he's in over his head. The cockiness and the eloquence of his attacks on other people ends up making us think he's a badass who's going to figure it out, and he's
Mhm.
not really worried about this because he has the balls to talk shit to a Haitian criminal who has a gun in his face.
Right. And also, so that penultimate, well, I guess it's not it's anti-penultimate scene, because I think we have the scene where,
Yeah, we have
and
the one in the hotel
yeah,
or the apartment.
but also, like, you could imagine if you had portrayed the relationship between Patrick and Angie in a more poignant and deft
Yes,
way,
right.
that the fact that he was losing her
Would
from his
matter.
decision would make
Right.
the decision seem even more important, and you could respect him more for making it.
Right. And that's why I think there was just this tension between trying to make Patrick this real character who's in over his head and trying to make him this cocky badass. Right. And when you
Yes.
go the cocky badass route, also his relationship, now part of this is Moynihan's problem too, but that relationship and the loss of the relationship becomes less meaningful.
Yes, it's more of an act of, like, virtuosity from Patrick. Like, look at how much of a badass I am. I'm just going to sacrifice this woman for the code, right?
Right.
Rather than being like an actual, like, poignant sacrifice that we know really hurts him deeply.
Right.
One thing that the film does an extremely good job of, though, is setting all of the kind of clues in the first half.
Yes.
And then bringing those together.
Right.
And we can see why a lot of these things that we didn't think were important actually are extremely important. Like, for example, the comment, I don't know who, we don't know who's Skinny Ray. I don't know him, from Remy Brisson.
Right. And the what was the other one that I remember that, or why they don't want to get the FBI involved, and why Jack Doyle doesn't want to get anybody else involved on the drop. Yes. So all of those things make sense. Yes. And so they do a good job with that. And again, it's a very intelligently written script, and Affleck shows a lot of discipline and maturity in the way he handles the fundamental moral problem in the film. I just think he doesn't show as much discipline with the Patrick character. And you can kind of see this is something you like more when you're 20 and you're like, yeah, Patrick's fucking cool. He talks shit to these guys.
Right.
And I think the older you get, the more you see it as a more restrained and disciplined filmmaker would have toned that back, went for more realism the way Polanski did in Chinatown. Even though it's not as immediately gratifying, it creates a better film overall. That's my take on it. And I understand it is entertaining in the immediate, and you enjoy it, and Patrick seems cooler, but I actually think that takes away from the challenges in the film, because it would have been better to illustrate clearly that Patrick's in over his head and that he's emotionally and intellectually vulnerable.
Yeah, and that he always has this clever soliloquy ready to go, right? Then makes that end confrontation. It's just like he's this cocksure. Here's why I'm making the decision, and he's able to back it up with this great eloquence. It probably would be better if he struggled to articulate why he was going to do what he did, right? And was maybe contradictory, or, just, I could see that working a little bit better.
Right. That's why I really think Chinatown is so perfect, is because they had you can see, like with Jack Nicholson's Jake Gittes, you could have the temptation to make him this sort of smarter than you, eloquent badass, but they actually avoid that. They make him smart but not genius, and he has some verbal gifts, but he's not particularly eloquent, and he's not the kind of guy who would rip up and insult this character eloquently in front of him, right? That's just not how he's played. He's played more like this real private investigator. And I mean, importantly, Gittes is sort of indignant about his profession, right?
Yeah.
I make an honest living. And Patrick, you could have had that with him, this sense that this is a guy who's struggling, right? Who's probably not terribly educated, who came from this neighborhood, and he's doing private investigative work. And in fact, another movie that came out around this time that I think is criminally underrated is Hollywoodland, where Adrian Brody plays this private investigator. And he kind of plays the private investigator I wish Patrick had been. This one where you get the sense that he is in over his head. He's not like this cocky badass, although he has some, you need a little bit of that, but not too much of it. And you get the sense that like his life is not very pleasant.
Yes. I agree with that, right? Because basically, if we have the view that Patrick took this case because he was concerned about money, right, and then got emotionally involved in it, and clearly is over his head because he's never done a case like this before, and he doesn't know how to handle it very well. Right. Yeah, there's right, because it is extremely hard to believe that this is his first big case, right? He's like with Sam Spade. he's had many cases that are high
Yes.
profile. That's just
Right.
how he rolls. Same thing with Philip Marlowe, right? They've been in this criminal underworld for a long time. Patrick knows some of these people, but he's not used to doing that kind of thing. So it is a little bit, I mean,
Right.
a
They make,
bit unbelievable.
yeah, and they make a point early in the film to draw attention to that, right? That
Right.
he's not, they've never done a case like this. But then you wouldn't know it for the rest of the film. If you just cut that out, you'd have no clue that they were relative neophytes here.
Yes. And the conversation with cheese is, I think, the most egregious example.
Yeah, that,
where it's just,
but even the bar scene is like totally unnecessary there. It's like you could have played it more straight up and there would be no need for all of the back and forth there. Right?
well, there seriously is like a more than a little Will Hunting
Yeah.
written into Patrick's character, where they're just like, we need this guy to have these awesome repartee and witty comments ready to go, because that's cool.
Yeah,
right? People like that.
Yeah, and in fact, you notice though, mostly that's dropped right after the cheese thing. I mean, I guess you could say like his response to Jack Doyle at the end is pretty carefully tailored and intelligent, but before that, you don't really get a lot of that. In fact, the dialogue with Remy, which is much more realistic, I think is more affecting because it's more realistic.
Yeah, and I think another potential issue that Affleck has, I think, as a writer, and I think this is the case when you watch Good Will Hunting, is Affleck's good at writing dialogue and scenes, but the narrative propulsion is a little bit weaker than the actual individual scenes themselves. More of like these vignettes that are really fun to watch and interesting.
Right, but that's why I think that middle narration is just a result of that.
That might be right.
Yes, he's better at thinking of the individual scenes than the story. So at that point, he's just like struggling to figure out where to go. And as a writer, I totally understand this, because often I'll have a paragraph and then another paragraph, and I'm like, I like these two paragraphs, but I have no fucking idea how they work together. And that's how it feels as though Affleck is certain in that case. And I think they solved that with creative editing in some scenes where you get the dialogue over it, but it just feels jarring at that point where he's not able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I think, it's a very, very good film. It clearly demonstrates Affleck's talent, that he's a director to watch out for.
Yes.
I really like the homage to the old school classic noirs. I like the neo-noir genre. And I really do appreciate this mainstream film that actually has a very interesting intellectual moral dilemma that you can debate about for years after you watch it.
Yeah,
that makes it more than just a fugacious film.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's interesting, because I rewatched Town not long ago, and Town is a much better movie than I had remembered, and it's better than Gone Baby Gone, I think, in every way except for the plot. There's a little bit less moral meat on it, although it's still there's a lot there. It's just not quite. It's so like, even though Gone Baby Gone's technically not as good of a film, it's one that you would rather watch, and it has more to discuss.
It's interesting. I think each of Affleck's films has gotten progressively worse.
Well, again, that depends on
depending on how
the Town is better or worse. Yeah,
right.
But I agree that Argo's certainly worse, and it's just a lighter film. It's not as compelling. And then I haven't seen the last one.
Yeah, neither have I. But it seems that there's something of a trajectory there. Argo's an interesting film because critics really loved it, and audiences enjoyed it.
Yeah.
but it's not going to hold up. Like,
No,
it's
it's
not a film you're going to say, hey, like, let's watch Argo, you
no, it's
know?
very clearly it's one of those incredibly weak best movies of the best picture that it's just forgettable, right?
Right.
It doesn't last more than a couple years. And yeah, I haven't thought about rewatching it since I watched it. I haven't been
I
like,
haven't
I'd
either.
like to go watch Argo again.
Right, right. Yes. All right. So we will be back again next week. We're not sure what film we're doing, but we will be here with Cinema Pod.